Nowadays, having a disability, being different is viewed positively. But growing up, um, it was not always that way. So, and I think a lot of it has to do with it was the pre-internet age, and um, I think my parents especially really wanted me to be accepted by society. And so they always encouraged me to wear my prosthetic. I mean, there were exceptions. Obviously, I was skiing without my prosthetic, and swimming without it. And I had little armpit crutches, and I used those at home. There were a few times I would just go without my leg to school and hop. I remember hopping around at school in elementary school a few times. But they really ingrained in me that if you're going to go out, you're going to wear your prosthetic, and you're going to walk. You're going to need to do that. And that's what my other friends did. But what really stood out for me was seeing, I had never seen so many adaptive athletes in person at one event. People missing legs, arms, etc. People in wheelchairs, competing, and all the different ways they adapt. And I was just in awe watching these people, watching women with one leg hop over to their bike, get on their bike, and take off in the biking portion of the race, watching people run with the blade foot. Um, and I had never been around that before. And it really lit this fire inside me where I thought, I want to learn how to do this. I want to increase my mobility to be able to compete in things like this and do more adventurous things in my life.
Well, Wendy, welcome to the podcast. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your time with us to talk about yourself today and tell us your story. And so I'd love for you to just introduce yourself to our audience and our listeners.
Yeah, hi, I'm Wendy Gideon, and I am a above the knee amputee, and I've been involved in adaptive athletics all of my life. So I was born without my right leg, and actually, besides being a right leg amputee, I'm also limb different in three out of my four limbs. So I was born with a shortened left arm and left leg. My left foot was clubbed at birth, so sort of pointed inwards, and then my left arm is shorter, and I had my fingers were fused, so I have three workable fingers that I use. So I am currently a professor of biology at a community college here in San Diego County. I have two small children, 6 and 8 years old, and we just finished a 1 year trip doing van life as a family of four. We traveled across the US, down through central Mexico, and all the way north to the farthest point you can drive by land, and got jumped in the Arctic Ocean. And that was in the Northwest Territories of Canada. And then we went to Alaska and did that 30,000-mile road trip in a year. Um, so I'll sort of start there. Let me know what you want me to elaborate on from that little intro.
Yeah, could you mind diving into like your favorite part about the journey? Because it sounds like you're just a world traveler, been all over, and that's kind of the hype right now is the van life and traveling. So I'd love to get your take on it and how it was for your family of four doing that.
Yeah, so this was our biggest adventure as a family yet. Pre kids, my husband and I had done a lot of traveling. He lived and worked in the Middle East, Bahrain. So I traveled, and we went to Bahrain for a while, and also traveled throughout Europe. We did a 2 week dog sled expedition through northern Sweden, We've been to Indonesia, and prior to having kids, we actually had another van that was a more rustic experience. It was a Ford Econoline with a four-wheel drive conversion that had no kitchen, no bathroom, just a king size bed, and five of us adults traveled throughout Canada for a summer in it, rock climbing and biking and hiking and exploring. So we did quite a bit of that. We are also on the border with Baja, Mexico. So we'd been to Baja several times in our previous van, and then in 2019, my husband bought a brand new empty Chevy Express box truck, and he said, "I'm going to do the full van build himself." And uh, he actually is very excellent at engineering, although he's all self-taught. So with the availability of YouTube and those sorts of tools, he figured out all of this himself. I'm actually sitting in the vehicle right now. um, and it was just an empty box truck, and he fully built a bed system. So it's a double bed system, and there's a kitchen, bathroom, there's solar panels, battery backup. He did have the four-wheel drive conversion done by a local company here in San Diego called WeldTech. But otherwise, everything else was of his own design and his own vision and creation. And he bought it when my youngest child, my son, was pretty much just an infant. And so it wasn't on my radar. I was mom brain working. I had my son who was just born, and then I had a 2-year old at the time. And so it wasn't on my radar. I He said, "Oh, I bought this box truck. We're going to travel." And I said, "Wow, okay." And I'm going to do the whole van build myself, and it'll only take me about 6 months, he said. And 7 years later, well, almost. Uh, actually, more like five years is finally when he got it ready to go. And we had this planned. So one of the benefits of my job is that every 7 years I can take a sabbatical leave from my professorship. So this was part of our plan, was I would be able to take this time off, and he works contract work, so he's a little more flexible with his job. So we planned to take this year off, travel, homeschool the kids. And honestly, we at first thought we could make it all the way to South America in a year and back, and then realized we had bit off more than we could chew. And so the trip sort of evolved where, in a way, we didn't really even have an itinerary exactly. Everybody says, "Oh, well, did you plan to go this and this, place?" And that's really not how it works when you do van life. So you sort of have a general idea of where you want to go, but that is part of the flexibility of living in your vehicle, is that you can roll up somewhere and find that it's really awesome and decide to stay there for a couple days or a week, or you roll up somewhere and it's not as awesome as you thought. So you just pick up and continue on to the next place. So we had this rough idea. We started the van trip in August of 2023. And about 3 weeks into the trip, we had just done a few of our neighboring states. So we'd had a lot of fun. We did the Idaho BDR, the backcountry discovery route, on our vehicle. And I would bike every day 20 miles, through the off-road area, and then the van would basically trail me. Um, and we saw lots of wildlife, and we camped at little remote lakes that we found. And we had just crossed into Montana, and then my son actually broke his arm at a campground, and just really random. I mean, we'd been doing some very extreme mountain biking and exploring, and this particular day we were just at a simple campground with a grassy area, flat, and I was actually in the van, and my husband had been doing some repairs on the vehicle, so he had pulled all the wheels off the van, and the goal was to do some repairs before we continued, and my kids were just running around circles around the van, and then my son just fell and slid like first base sliding in, and and broke his arm, and we it was dramatic. Actually, there was a thunderstorm that was rolling in, so suddenly it starts pouring rain. My son is crying. All the wheels are off the vehicle. My husband's like throwing stuff into the vehicle, and I'm trying to figure out, trying to assess my son and decide, did he actually break his arm or what's going on? Since I didn't see it happen, the only one who saw it happen was uh, my 8-year-old daughter, and so we're trying to decide this, and he's in a lot of pain. And we actually call one of our friends who's a physical therapist on the phone, and a triage over the phone. And our friend says, you know what, you should take him to the ER. So my husband quickly got all the tires back on the vehicle, and we drove to the closest ER, which actually wasn't too far. It was about a 45-minute drive. So, and we'd been really remote prior to this. So, prior to this, if we had had to drive to an ER, it could have been upwards of like 3 hours. So, it was just 45 minutes to Missoula, Montana, and we roll up there pretty close to midnight, and they assess him and X-ray him and say, yeah, he has a fracture. He actually needs surgery. So we decided, we talked to our insurance, medical insurance, and found out that we should actually just come back to San Diego. So that was the first part of the van trip was, you get all these unexpected things that happen. So we actually did come back to San Diego. He did have surgery. Um, and then being 5, which he was at the time, he recovered in 4 weeks, just fully, I mean, out of the cast. Everything was fine. He had pins that were in place, and they had to, remove those pins. But now he doesn't even remember what arm was broken. So, he was fine. And so right around November, we got back on the road, and we traveled east from California. And the goal was also more just shakedown of the vehicle. So we had never been in the van doing, other than those few weeks before my son Bryce broke his arm, we hadn't really done any, big time off roading. And we wanted to do that before we took off into another country. At least that was what I said too. I said, let's just see. Plus, it was holiday time was rolling up, and we had never been to some of the states on the East Coast, so we decided to travel there, spend holidays with family, visiting family there. And once we got there, though, the farthest north we went in the U.S. was Virginia, and we decided it was way too cold. We weren't equipped for doing a snow trip. We're not opposed to snow trip. I've been skiing since elementary school. I learned how to be an adaptive skier through a program that's offered in Southern California at Big Bear. And they train, I learned how to ski with one leg, and I ski with, you might have seen it, but they look like little crutches with tiny skis on the end. And we call them outriggers. So I ski with one leg. I have my own, outriggers that I ski with, and I've been doing that, um, for over 30 years. So I love skiing, and we definitely want to do some ski trips in the van. But we had planned for a whole year, and then you think, well, do we want to carry all of our skis and all of our gear with that? And the van just kept getting heavier and heavier. Just having all the bikes on the back was about 500 pounds. So, and yeah, so you have to be really choosy about what you're going to bring when you're going to do a whole year of van life. And we decided this would probably not be the best for snow this time. We did one ski day where we just got rentals, but the rest of the time we said, let's go south. So we went to Florida. So we decided we didn't want to be in the snow. So we didn't want the short days. We wanted to go where it was warm. So we went to the Keys. The Florida Keys was where we spent most of our time, and that was a lot of fun. And so in my head, I sort of break the trip down into these different segments. There was segment one, which was before my son broke his arm, where we explored Utah and Idaho, and um, then we just started getting into Montana. And then there was part two, where we did a lot of the East Coast, Florida. We spent a lot of time in Texas. And then there was part three when we went into central Mexico. Totally different vibe than the US, obviously. Very different. Um, Nice. And the cool thing about van life too is just the contrast that you get. Just it's a constant contrast of, you can be in a place that's cold and then drive to a place that's warm, or be in wow, Florida was just so clean. That was one of the things we noticed. It's just every city was just so clean. There's no homeless. It's not like it is here in California. Um, so I mean, Miami, we just were just in awe of how clean it was. And but the thing about the U.S. though is, especially on the East Coast, we discovered is that there's just not a lot of places to off road, and there's a lot of people. There's a lot more people on the East Coast. The more east you go, the more people there are. And we rolled into Florida and not realizing that all the snowbirds were there in the campgrounds, and that there was nowhere to camp. If you hadn't booked it 6 months, at least 6 months in advance, there was nowhere to camp. We got lucky because my husband is a veteran, so we did get a veteran military campground on a military base in the Keys, and that was sort of the saving grace. But we spent a lot of nights in Walmart parking lots, in Cracker Barrel parking lots. That became our big joke was, oh, here we are at the Cracker Barrel again to camp. And we ended up getting on the rewards program because we were there so much, and so you would wake up and go eat at the Cracker Barrel in the morning. Um, yeah, so from sleeping in Walmart parking lots and Cracker Barrel parking lots, we then roll into central Mexico, and we go deep down into Mexico, into the remote sections. And that's really, to me, that's really where the adventure sort of started, because we'd been to Mexico a few times, and we'd also done the more traditional, like, resort style visits to Mexico. We did that during the pandemic. We went to Cancun because prices were so cheap. So we flew there and spent time in Cancun at resorts. But my kids were little then. They were 2 years old and 4 years old back then. Um, and we had done some road tripping to Puerto Vallarta before, so we had traveled through some of the more remote states. But we actually were traveling with another family that time, so this was the first time we were just solo traveling. And when you go deep down into Mexico, into central Mexico, you encounter these remote towns where it looks like you've gone back in time. Like, basically, you've time traveled 200 years in the past. That's what the architecture looks like. Uh, the people wear their traditional, very traditional clothing. Um, Most people are farmers or shopkeepers or restaurant owners. People ride around on their donkeys. Nobody
Hmm.
speaks English, not a word of English. And I I had to do most of the communicating when my Spanish isn't amazing, but enough to navigate or order food or ask if we can camp places. Um, and that's the other thing about Mexico is that there's not really established campgrounds like you see in the U.S. And there's niceness to that. You can go to a nice state park in the U.S. or a nice national park, and you'll get your little spot, that has hookups, and just around the bend there'll be a really nice bathroom with showers. You get all those perks of U.S. travel, but in Mexico there's none of that. So you can roll up on beaches and there's nobody there, and you can just claim that little beach to yourself. And that's the magic of it to me, is that you go places that, you know, most American travelers have never experienced and seen. And, talk to the locals and find out, what's cool to do in that area. And I loved it. I'm I loved waking up in the morning and swimming in warm ocean. I mean, that's really unique to me living in San Diego. Our ocean is cold year round. And so waking up, being in a beautiful warm ocean and swimming out and seeing all sorts of colorful fish, and it's just really, really magical.
I love everything you're talking about, and something I would love to dive more or have you expand upon is like what it's like to really immerse yourself into like another culture in another country, especially for those that maybe have never been outside of the U.S. And just kind of give you an idea, I spent 2 years in Japan, and living there, just experience that culture was incredible. And so I'd love to kind of get your experience and then tell our listeners more about it and what it's like.
Yeah, so exactly. I mean, that's the other amazing contrast of going to other countries, is experiencing what their culture is. And so I'd say Mexico is a big part of that. Obviously, the language difference, being in places where nobody spoke English. Um, and, my kids especially are really picky eaters. And everybody just had to adapt that we're going to eat tacos for every meal. That's what they got. um, and I would say the other culture we got to experience in the year was going all the way up through the Northwest Territories. You get into the Inuit people, and so the when we did the northern part of our van life trip, and this was just this previous summer, we made it all the way to a little Inuit village called Tuktoyaktuk. My 6-year-old says this so cute, by the way. So we all had trouble saying the name of this village, and you can abbreviate it. You could just call it Tuk, but the full name is Tuktoyaktuk. And so it is right on the Arctic Ocean. And I thought that was really fascinating too, because um, for one, I could converse with these people as opposed to in Mexico. Tried, to converse with locals, but it was challenging. I was on my Babbel app, I was trying to learn the language, and I took Spanish in high school, and that was a long time ago. So just trying to refresh my memory, it's hard to get into deep conversations with the locals, but um, with the Inuit people in Tuktoyaktuk, we got to get into conversations with them and learn more about their culture and eat their local cuisine, is called muktuk. Have you heard of that? So muktuk is actually beluga whale. Um, yeah, so that's their local cuisine, is beluga whale. When you live in the Arctic, you eat the food that's available, right? And so that's what they hunt, and they freeze it. And so while we were there, of course, we had to try it, right? Um, yeah, so we tried the muktuk, and they bring it out on a plate with just little cubes of it. It's just the whale blubber, and has like a little toothpick in it. And so it has about 15 little chunks on a plate, and we tried it, and each tried it. It's a little chewy, but um, and the other interesting thing was there was an older gentleman who was at this restaurant, and he was talking about it and just the hunting that they do there. And he said, they also hunt polar bears. And he had several pictures of his hunts of polar bears. And the interesting thing to me was this one hunt, he had this beautiful polar bear that he had hunted, a picture of it on the wall. And he said, or I said to him, I said, okay, so what did you do with all this meat, all this polar bear meat? And he said, oh, we didn't eat it. And I said, really? And he said, oh yeah, we leave it for the other animals to come and get. And I guess that's just what they do. If they don't need it, then they leave it, and I guess other animals come and get it. Um, and we missed the polar bears. There was a sighting of polar bears the week after we left, where we saw um, on Instagram that there was polar bears out there in the Arctic. We all got in the ocean, by the way. We all got in the Arctic. It's 29 degrees Fahrenheit water, 35 degrees Fahrenheit air temp. But if you go to the Arctic Ocean, you got to get in it. Is my philosophy. So we all got in it. Not the kids. The kids wouldn't get in it. We were traveling with another family at that point. So another family of four with kids around our kids' age, and all the adults got in, but the kids said no. They would rather play on their tablets. They get in the Arctic Ocean, and I feel like I did it right. So I did a kayak first, and it was really high wind. So I thought I could make it to these little islands they had out. Didn't look like they were too far away. I thought, oh yeah, I can make it out to that little island. It'll be fine. But I set out in my kayak, and it was actually really cold. So I was dressed, in my winter coat. I had my winter boot on and ski pants, and because it was 35 degrees air temp. But once I got going on the kayak, trying to battle the wind, actually I couldn't make it, so I had to abort plan, and then go to the side of the little cove area we were at, and then our friends came and picked me up. So I had to abort mission, but I was really like heated up from that, so I thought, oh, okay, now's the time to just go run out there into the ocean and get my dip in. So it didn't actually feel that cold. Um, Google, yeah, Google
Really?
said it was 29 Fahrenheit water, but and we had been in some cold water in Canada. We had been in some alpine lakes that were pretty pretty cold. You get in and you just you start feeling like the numbness and like the tingling. Your body
Yeah.
starts going into shock and saying you should be getting out of this, abort, abort. But I felt like the Arctic Ocean was pretty refreshing.
What do you mean by refreshing?
Refreshing because I was really warm from the kayak trip, that I just battled the wind, and I had all my coats on, so I was super warmed up, and it felt really good actually just to jump into the Arctic. And I wasn't in for very long. I contemplated doing a swim because that was my big thing. Was every If I could find a spot to swim, I would do I would do an open water swim, a mile at least of an open water swim wherever we were. And so I contemplated that, but I decided I wanted to get in just my swimsuit, not my wetsuit. So I got in my swimsuit. It was pretty cold, but it felt good because had just been exercising. But it still had the numbness factor on your fingers and toes. And I
Yeah.
thought, plus we were in a hurry. We were trying to make the ferry. And so uh, we packed up and left. But then the ferry was delayed for about 5 days. We had to stay in a little another remote village for about 5 days waiting. So we realized we actually could have had more time at the Arctic Ocean if we wanted.
I hate when that happens, right? You plan on something, then it just goes awry, and something else happens, and then here we
Well,
are.
that's the flexibility of van life too. I mean, it really taught
Yeah.
me to just be ultimate flexible. And we never really had plans more than just between 1 to 3 days ahead of schedule. You know, we kind of knew where we were going to be the next night, but sometimes we would use this app um, that you can get for overlanders. It's called iOverlander. And so you open up this app and it shows you where other overlanders have camped and their recommendations, and if it's free camping or if it's paid camping, and then everybody writes reviews about it. And so I was usually the navigator. My husband was driving, although I would we would trade off, occasionally. But he was more of the driver. I was more of the navigator. So I would open up the iOverlander app, search all the local postings from other overlanders, and decide from there where we would go the next night. So it's just living in the moment is the experience of van life. But it's very exciting. I mean, you never know what's going to be there exactly, and you wake up and decide, hey, I want to go to the beach today, or let's drive to the mountains. We've been it's been overly hot, so let's. So in Mexico, it was mostly really hot. I mean, we were there in the spring, so it wasn't as crazy hot as it gets in summertime, but it was 110, 112 Fahrenheit most days. And even with the air conditioning running in the van, sometimes we couldn't get the van internal temperature lower than like 100. So it was really hot. We were all just living in our swimsuits. That's just what you do. It's that hot. You just get in and out of the water, at all these spots. But we did go up to the mountains at one point in Mexico to they have an active volcano called El Popo. And so we went up there and camped, and it was amazing. It got to, very cool temperatures at night where we actually had to run the heater. And it just felt really amazing that we had just been sweating like crazy, just a couple days ago. And then suddenly we were up in the mountains, watching this active volcano puff, spew out its debris, from the distance. And we parked in just some farmland that I found on iOverlander that people had parked at before, and some locals actually came through and were tending to the farmland, but they never came and bothered us or told us to leave or anything. And then I did a big mountain bike circle throughout that whole farmland. I did that solo, and it was just wonderful weather. It was super nice. So like 50 degrees Fahrenheit. A big contrast from it just been 112 where we were camping previously. So um, yeah.
Yeah, I'm been very fascinated by like all your travels and everything you're telling us, and I appreciate, especially the iOverland app. I think that's really great that people can find that now through this conversation. Something that really is sticking out to me though is throughout all your travels, you've done a lot of hiking and biking and kayaking and swimming. So I'd love for you to just talk about like how those activities kind of impact your life and like why they're important for your life.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's that's a good story too because it's been evolving my whole life. So, I'm a congenital amputee, which means I've been an amputee my whole life. And um, I was involved in skiing and swimming as a young kid, but it wasn't until I moved to San Diego about 11 years ago that I started getting involved in more adventurous stuff. And it was sort of a perfect storm of a lot of things that came together, um, that opened up more mobility options for me. So I'll talk a little bit about that. Um, so in 2013, I moved to San Diego, and I was living in British Columbia, Canada at the time. And my marriage ended, and I'm from California. So I wanted to move back, and my sister was living in San Diego. I had grown up in the Los Angeles area, and then I went to grad school in the Davis area, Northern California. And so I applied for jobs in San Diego, and I landed my dream job as a biology professor. But it was just a lot of new beginnings for me. So coming to San Diego, it was a new job. Um, I recently divorced, and I I actually got involved with an organization here, and I'm wearing their swag today. This organization is the
Oh,
Challenge
okay.
Athletes
Yeah.
Foundation. Yeah, CAF. And that so San Diego is their main hub, and this is an organization that helps provide opportunities for adaptive athletes, um, and they offer events and they have fundraisers. And so I started going to their activities. So I moved here in August, and then I started going to their activities in September. And some of the organizers said, "Hey, do you want to do our triathlon in October?" And I had never done a triathlon, and I said, "Well, sure, yeah, but there's there's two problems. One is I don't really have the running skills, and I don't have the biking skills. I'd always had swimming skills, so I learned to swim before I learned to walk. So I've been swimming a long time, and I've done swim team. But at that point, I actually was not really. I had just so what happened was I had just got my new job, and so I had much better medical insurance, and I had applied to get these specialized hiking crutches called side sticks crutches. I don't know if you've heard of them. They became
I've not.
really it was a big deal in 2010, and this was 2013. So right around that time, these were high performance forearm crutches for amputees, and the co-founder it was a leg amputee, and she developed these crutches alongside her husband, who was some sort of engineer, and they had shock absorption, and they were more lightweight and modular. So I had, but they were expensive. So I had used my medical insurance to pay for those, and they had just come in the mail, but I hadn't adjusted them or even used them at all. So I wasn't, ready to use them for a race capacity. And then the other thing is I'd never learned to ride a bike. So I had tried as a kid with one leg to do it, and I never figured it out. And so um, and you have to realize that so I'm almost 42, and I grew up pre-internet. There was no, there was no social media, no YouTube, no Instagram, no no role models for me that were athletes. I mean, they didn't start putting the Paralympics on TV until after I graduated high school. So, I would turn on the TV as a kid, and I would never see anybody that looked like me on there. No athletes. Um, and there were two other amputees that I had known in my life. One was a family friend. One is another girl who was in high school, the same high school as me. Um, Neither of which were athletes. They always wore their prosthetic leg. And a big thing back then as an amputee, and it actually is still a thing, but to wear your prosthetic leg with a foam covering on it. And I have to cringe at that now because let me explain. And that's all I saw. My two friends who I knew were amputees, they always wore their prosthetic leg. And they had this foam covering on it, and I had it too. so that it looked like that prosthetic leg matched your real leg. So if you wear pants or um, tights or something, it looks normal. And I have to tell you that um, back then, nowadays having a disability, being different is viewed positively. But growing up, um, it was not always that way. So and I think a lot of it has to do with it was the pre-internet age, and um, I think my parents especially really wanted me to be accepted by society. And so they always encouraged me to wear my prosthetic. I mean, there were exceptions. Obviously, I was skiing without my prosthetic, and swimming without it. And I had little armpit crutches, and I used those at home. There were a few times I would just go without my leg to school and hop. I remember hopping around at school in elementary school a few times. But they really ingrained in me that if you're going to go out, you're going to wear your prosthetic, and you're going to walk. You're going to need to do that. And that's what my other friends did. And so um, when I when I came to San Diego and I started getting involved with Challenge Athletes Foundation, I had never seen anything like other adaptive athletes um, doing what they could do. So I ended up doing the triathlon, but I just did the swim because that's all the skills I had at the time. So I did the 1 mile open water swim um, out the La Jolla Cove. But what really stood out for me was seeing, I had never seen so many adaptive athletes in person at one event. People missing legs, arms, etc. People in wheelchairs, competing, and all the different ways they adapt. And I was just in awe watching these people, watching women with one leg hop over to their bike, get on their bike, and take off in the biking portion of the race, watching people run with the blade foot. Um, and I had never been around that before. And it really lit this fire inside me where I thought, I want to learn how to do this. I want to increase my mobility to be able to compete in things like this and do more adventurous things in my life. And certainly none of those people were wearing prosthetic legs with foam on it. Nobody. They all showed their metal. And it was right after that I went and saw my prosthetist and I said, just take the foam off my leg. I don't want it on there. It's purely cosmetic, and it actually really impairs the function of the prosthetic so that the knee doesn't bend as well. There's really no point to it. And I said, just take it off. I'm going to wear it as a robot leg. And that's just, how I want to wear it. I want it to be the most functional that it can be. And so CAF was just really helpful to me. The organizers were amazing. And what they offered me was some grant funding. So I applied for 2 of their grants and was awarded both of them. One was for a running foot. So all these, adaptive equipment, this isn't something that standard comes with your medical insurance. So you have to pay for a lot of these things out of pocket. And, I had just started a new job, but I didn't have a lot of money. And so it was really nice that they, offered me that. So I got a blade foot as a adapter for my prosthetic leg. And then I also was awarded a biking grant. So I went to their biking clinic where they teach you how to ride a bike. And they it was actually pretty small. There was only about 10 of us there, and it was hard. But it was a big goal of mine to learn how to ride a bike, and I think I might have stood out because I really tried hard. And at the end, one of the organizers said, we have this biking grant. We think you'd be really, would be somebody who would really benefit from it. And so I applied for their biking grant, and they awarded me, several $1,000s that I used to purchase my first bike, a road bike. and begin my journey of eventually, now I'm a mountain biker, intermediate level mountain biker. And yeah, I never would have imagined, 10 years ago that would happen. But, um, so Challenge Athletes Foundation was big on that. But the other interesting thing was right around that same time, again, new job, just moved to San Diego, getting involved with the Challenge Athletes Foundation. I then met my husband, Brian, and he is another big factor of how I developed all of these mobility skills and increased my mobility to where I am today, where just incredibly more mobile now in my 40s than I was in my 20s, which is amazing. And so I met Brian, and I'll tell you just this quick little story about when we met. We would go on our first date, and we have dinner, and he knows I'm an amputee, and it's also Halloween, so I'm dressed as Supergirl. So I have my Supergirl outfit on, and I have red tights on, and of course, again, my mindset at the time and what my parents had ingrained in me is you go out, you wear your prosthetic leg, and of course, it had its foam on it, and so I had my foam leg on, and Brian says, "Let's go for a walk on the beach." And I think to myself, "Oh no, I can't walk on this beach like in my foam leg." It's just not gonna happen. And of course, I don't let him know that, and I say, "Oh yeah, sure, let's go for a walk on this beach." Um, and walking in my foam leg is hard enough on flat surface. You're on a beach, uneven ground like that. And I gave it my best shot, but he could tell I was struggling, and I'm struggling to walk, keep up with him. And I say, I'm not great at walking on sand in this leg, but I just got these forearm crutches from Side Sticks. I haven't adjusted them yet. I'm not really sure how to use them, but I think that might be the key for me to be able to walk on the beach in the future. And he was really nice about it. And the interesting thing was then our second date, I brought the forearm crutches, and he started tinkering with them, and that really impressed me because I had never dated anybody who cared about my adaptive tools. Certainly not my ex-husband. In fact, my ex-husband, um, he left me for someone else, and he really uh, he really hurt me because he said, "Well, I want to be with a woman who can mountain bike with me, who can hike with me, and you're not going to be able to do that." And so he found someone else who could, and he left. And it was really hurtful for me. And it's part of, where, coming to San Diego, seeing people like me who were athletic. And then I met my husband, Brian, and he had a completely different attitude about my disability. And he just has a contagious optimism about everything. And he said, "Oh, yeah, I could teach you how to bike. We'll fix these forearm crutches." He's tinkering with them. And of course, because my arms are different lengths, my left arm is shorter. He said, "Well, we need to adjust it so that this works, with your left arm being shorter. And then the way my left hand is, I have trouble with grip. So he said, "Well, we could just bungee your hand down, and then that'll help, so your hand will be able to grip the crutch." Grip. And so he had all these creative ideas, all these great ideas, and he's really the one that taught me to ride a bike. He taught me how to rock climb. He taught me scuba. uh, he was a scuba instructor at the time, and he he is the one that sort of drives a lot of our adventures. But what I love is that he is just happy to problem solve with me. And it's not like Wendy can't do that. It's how can Wendy do that? And that is the kind of person that I was looking for my whole life. And so I was just thrilled, that all those things sort of aligned together. And from there, so this past summer, we did a 20-mile hike in Alaska as a family. That is my record right now, is 20 miles on crutches. And that's a big change from meeting Brian, and I couldn't even walk, you know, a few hundred yards on the beach, to now I can hike 20 miles on forearm crutches with 2,000 feet of elevation gain. So not flat. And it was a very, it was a very ambitious hike, but, and we actually broke it into two pieces. So it was a 10-mile out and then a 10-mile back. But um, still, I mean, I'm amazed with what just my, personally being able to accomplish when I didn't know if those things were possible. And part of it is also the technology. I mean, when I was trying to learn to ride a bike, when most kids are, when they're 5 years old, or between the ages of 5 and 10 years old, most people are learning to ride a bike. And for me, I couldn't quite get the momentum of, you only have one foot on one pedal, so how do you get the momentum going? And what Brian really helped me with was, the clipping your foot to the pedal technology. They actually call it clipless pedals, which doesn't quite make sense to me, but just the idea that you can you clip your foot to the pedal with a locking mechanism, and then you can use that. That's how I power the bike. And there's a learning curve to it, because you have to be able to unclip quickly, and not crash and fall. Uh, and it certainly wasn't easy for me to learn to ride a bike. So I learned to ride a bike when I was 35, and my husband taught me, and it was really hard for me, and I probably fell over 100 times, and my daughter was an infant at the time, and sometimes we would bring her while I was trying to learn to ride a bike, and I remember just looking at my daughter and thinking, in just a few years, she's going to be riding a bike, and I want to be riding a bike with her. I don't want to be mom. Mom can't ride a bike. Mom's going to be at home. I wanted to be the kind of mom that would be with my kids through all of the activities. I didn't want to be left behind. So if we're mountain biking, I want to be mountain biking. If we're rock climbing, I want to be rock climbing. We're hiking 20 miles. Mom's going to hike the 20 miles. Um, so I wanted. That's a big motivating factor for me about why I push myself to figure out what am I capable of. And I think for people with disabilities, especially somebody like me, um, because I'm limb different in three different limbs, there's nobody else that has my exact configuration. Even looking at other amputees, um, we're all different. Some amputees can't wear a prosthetic. It just doesn't work for them. Some of them are really proficient. That's what they prefer. And of course, above the knee amputees are a completely different category than below the knee amputees in terms of their comfort with prosthetics, usually. But throw in the fact that, I was born with a club foot, so, that is different. And, having the left arm differences, there's nobody that has this exact configuration. I'm literally one of a kind. And so, how do I know what I'm capable of until I try it? This is completely different than most humans, who we can look back in history and we could see, okay, people with, typical human anatomy, typical number of limbs and fingers and all that, this is how far they usually can hike. This is how far, this is, the record for mountain climbing. This is the record for sport climbing or bouldering. This is what these people are capable of. And you, as somebody who's normal anatomy, can look at that and say, well, okay, that's probably what, is, I'm capable of doing those things. But for me, there's nobody like me. So how do I know what I'm capable of? I am literally setting my own metrics, my own data. There's nobody else. There's no other statistics. I mean, I can look at other amputees and see what they're doing, but they don't have the foot issues that I do. They don't have the hand issues that I do. So it's very different, you know, to try to understand. And that's exciting too, because I didn't know that I was capable of hiking 20 miles. I thought that would literally kill me. And certainly I was sore. Okay, because I'm hiking all on forearm crutches. So my back, at the end, I was so sore. And I just felt like, will I ever be able to like do this again? Will I be able to rotate my shoulders? But what was amazing to me was the next day I felt a lot better. And about 2 days later, I felt completely back to normal. So that tells me that my body is actually capable of that. I didn't do, the soreness that I felt was just good soreness, not, I've injured myself soreness. And it means that I could probably push myself even farther than that. And we're thinking of doing the Annapurna circuit in Nepal as a family. So that will be the next stage of hiking. So the Annapurna circuit is a fascinating trail you can do in Nepal that allows you to. It's considered a tea house trek because you're in the remote areas of Nepal and you hike between 5 to 10 miles a day, and then you stay in these tea houses where people you just pay them a few dollars American, and they provide you with food, and you sleep in their house, and you get to see all this beautiful scenery, and you can hike upwards of 100 or more miles doing that. And that's always been my goal. When I learned about side sticks crutches, circle back to that, when those came out, that was a amputee, um, Sarah Doherty, who's now passed away recently, actually. But she was when I heard about her, that's when I applied for those crutches, because she was Canadian and she was hiking the West Coast Trail, which is a famous trail. I was living in British Columbia at the time, and she was hiking, about 20 miles doing that. And she did a couple mountain climbing. I believe she hiked in Alaska, Denali Mountain. And so she did a bunch on these side sticks crutches. And she was somebody I was, looking up to, and why I went ahead and purchased, applied to get those crutches, which were a couple $1,000s at the time. And I wanted to start hiking, and now here I am, following in Sarah Doherty's footsteps, so to speak. She's very inspirational, and she unfortunately passed away, I think, last year from a brain aneurysm.
Oh,
Yeah, so she actually wasn't that old. I think she was like early 60s, and passed away from a just random event, And so I think that probably answers your question.
yeah. I appreciate your candor with your life story and telling us about everything. And there's so much there that really sticks out. But there's something that I think really sticks out to me is both when you're talking about your husband and then the Challenge Athletics Foundation you found this community. And so I think that's something we could explore. And I think that's what a lot of people are really looking for nowadays is a community, right? And as someone, whether it be, and it doesn't have to specifically pertain to someone that is living with a disability or an adaptation, it can be someone, in what you call the able bodied community. How important and how impactful do you think a community is? And would you encourage people to find a community, even if it's not sport related?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, for me, growing up with a disability, just Instagram and YouTube would have been game changing for me, to just see what is possible, and then to network with those people and reach out, to those people, and realize, that there are disabled people doing awesome things. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I recently opened my Instagram public, recent actually, just in May of this year. And I should have done it at the beginning of the van trip. I'm regretting that. But I had a lot going on and homeschooling the kids. And I was actually in a doctoral program myself. Um, and so I had a lot going on and I didn't. But so somewhere halfway through the van trip, it occurred to me that we were doing some pretty amazing things that most people never get to do, let alone somebody with a disability doing what we were doing every day. Um, and I thought, I think people might want to see this. And maybe I could open a window for people that are like me to see what's possible. And that has been a really interesting experience to open my account public. And, I'm not amazing at social media. I'll admit that, but I'm learning. And putting together these videos and putting together these posts where I'm showing myself publicly, um, in ways that I mean, honestly, growing up, my parents always said, you always wear your leg, try to, you do, you definitely, my mom she used to take my swimsuits and she would put covering over my residual limb area because she thought that other kids would stare and make fun of me. Um, and so certainly, I never thought I'd be waltzing around in public in my bathing suit like I am on Instagram. But I figured, if able bodied women can do that, I can do that. And I could show that, hey, it's okay to have a different look to your leg. I could show my missing leg in public and show you, what I'm capable of doing because I still meet, I've had a lot of amputees reach out to me on Instagram since I've opened my account publicly. Um, and the ones that I've really gotten into good talks with, they've shared things like, well, I'm not really comfortable showing my missing leg in public, but it's really amazing that you do, or I didn't know that these things were possible. Especially for new amputees, people that um, feel like, yeah, I've had people reach out to me and say, I feel like my life is over. I just lost my leg to cancer. I had all these things going for me and I was an athlete and now I can barely, get to the bathroom. And I'm really hoping that by talking to me and by seeing what I'm capable of doing, that it, it shows them what's possible and it gives them, it opens a door for them. And that's the cool thing about social media that I didn't have is that I could talk to people from Europe. I could talk to people from Australia and New Zealand, on Instagram, and that could be your community because chances are some of these places there's not going to be other amputees in your neighborhood, but you could certainly find this community online and we can have great conversations across the oceans and I can show you what's possible and, share my experience. And of course, everybody's different. That's really important to notice is that, some amputees are big on their prosthetics. Like I said, like they do everything. They do biking. They do everything, but with their prosthetic. And oftentimes I get asked that because on my Instagram, mostly I show myself without my prosthetic leg. And that's because I have a very short, um, residual limb. I call it a stump. I don't know. Everybody has a different word for it. But, you know, it, so I was born with a half inch of femur on my right side. So basically, no limb. And I had limb lengthening surgery at 10 years old so that I would have some sort of residual limb. And I grew 10 centimeters from that procedure. And so I'm still an above the knee amputee, but I do have, I do have a, I have about 4 inches or so of limb there, Yeah, that's another story how that happened, because I had that surgery in 1992, and I was the eighth person in the world to have it done, and the first person to have it done with a starting amount of bone as small as what I had. So um, I look at my stump now and I see a miracle, because I had nothing, basically just a half inch, and prosthetic leg use was very difficult with what I was born with. I had to sit in basically the prosthetic leg. I called it a bucket. You sat in it, and it wrapped all the way around my waist with Velcro, um, and very hard to use. And so when I was 10 years old, my parents learned about limb lengthening, and I had the procedure done for free through Shriners Hospital. But it was, have you heard of that, limb lengthening?
Yeah, just a little bit. We haven't touched on it yet in any of my studies, but yeah, I have an idea of what it is. And then Shriners Hospital, I'm glad you mentioned them because that's a fantastic organization.
Yeah, I had all of my surgeries done through either Shriners Hospital or Scottish Rite, um, same sort of organization, all for free. So I had a lot of surgeries on my foot, my hand, and then I had limb lengthening. Um, and basically, so nowadays the technology is much better, but for me, it was an external device. So they take the bone, they slice it surgically, and then there's two pins in the top half of the bone and two pins in the bottom half of the bone, and those pins extend outside of your body to then an external device that sticks out outside of your body. And then what I would do is I would turn this knob every day, and it would separate the bone, and so this would allow the bone to naturally regenerate itself, which is what bone is good at, especially when you're 10 years old. And, you slowly separate the half of the bone, and the bone regrows along with the tissues. And at the end, you end up stretching to your desired length. And for me, 10 centimeters was about as long as it would stretch. Um, and I had several complications from the procedure, but I was new to it, right? I mean, I was the eighth person in the world and the first person with a starting amount so small. So I was in like the medical journals, and this fascinated me, by the way. And I'm now a biologist, and I would say a lot of that was from my own biology being somewhat of a mystery. Um, the cause of my disability is somewhat of a mystery to this day. um, yes. And so, and then I went through this whole medical procedure, and they flew me out to medical conferences and showcased, what was happening. And, I got to kind of I was the guinea pig, but, I was part of research at a very young age. And, what they were able to do is pretty remarkable. It was painful. I had a lot of complications. I had the hip dislocate from the pressure of pulling. So the hip dislocated. I had infection of the pins. I had the pins dislodge and pinch a nerve. I was put in a body cast at the time that my hip dislocated. So I was in a body cast for 6 months, you know, at, and we had to keep starting and stopping the procedure because I had all these complications. The doctors didn't like that, that I had all these complications. Didn't make them look good, but um, and several times they said, "Should we just give up? Should we just call it good, Wendy?" And I said, "No, let's just keep going. I want to go as far as we can." And so we went as far as we could stretch it, um, and the bone was very like stretched. So the tip of the limb, you could feel the edge of the bone. And nowadays, it's most people do an internal device. So with where you use magnets that pull the bone apart, and you put a magnetic device on top of the limb, and then it pulls it apart, and you don't have to do the manual cranking that I had to do, which was painful. And you know, it was hard. There was definitely hard moments of that experience, especially being so young. And it took much longer than we thought. It took about 2 years to get the 10 centimeters, and I had this huge metal device sticking out from me, kept getting infected, and um, so it was rough. It was really rough. And when the device finally came out, then I had to learn to walk again, because now I had a completely different type of limb, longer limb, so I was fitted with a different type of prosthetic leg. And the goal, of course, was for prosthetic leg use, to have a longer limb there so that I could use more comfortably a prosthetic leg that didn't wrap around my entire body, my entire waist, like my previous prosthetics had. So it was a success in that sense. Um, and I had revision surgery in 2015 to repair some of the scarring, um, and just kind of smooth it out and make it a more comfortable fit for my prosthetic leg. But yeah, it was a traumatic event, but it's something that I'm grateful for now.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing, especially in detail, like everything you went through and stuff like that. And it's fascinating too, like you said, it got that like taste for biology, which you ended up becoming and getting your doctorate in, which is awesome to hear. And then I think something that like I had it and I just lost it.
It's a lot
Um,
of things.
I hate when that happens. It was, but I mean, no, I really do appreciate you like sharing in detail what's going on, because there's a lot of people that I can sit here and think about it, but the details you described are you know
I've
helpful,
never,
especially with the surgery
yeah,
like
I've
that.
never
And
met
then
anyone else that has had limb lengthening. I'd love to compare notes with somebody else who's experienced that, because I mean it was pretty miraculous that my body could regenerate a part of itself. You know, in a way, it's interesting because I'm considered an amputee, but I've never had anything amputated exactly. Like my leg was just never there.
yeah,
And in fact, we regenerated part of my leg rather than amputate it. So it's sort of funny to think about it that way. Is that I'm a regeneratee. I don't know, and rather than an amputee. Um, but yeah, it's interesting. I've met other amputees that have been born without limbs or with limb deficiencies similar to mine. Never again, exactly the same, like we were talking about earlier. That I've never met anyone that has exactly. I'm sort like I think of myself as one of a kind. There's nobody that I've aware of that has exactly the limb shortening and the syndactyly, and the club foot and all the exact same things. Um, but I have met other amputees, and the closest. So, I was born in the early '80s, and uh, my mother was young. She was healthy. There was no limb issues in the family, no medical issues in the family. And so she, standard of care back then was, if those are you're not a high risk pregnancy and you're, 25 years old and you're healthy, there's no reason to go into the depth of prenatal care that they do nowadays. As standard of care nowadays, most people have at least one ultrasound, if not more than that, during a pregnancy. My mom had none, no ultrasounds, and when I was born, it was a surprise, which is it's hard to imagine what that would be like. And I think it was really scary for them because they were young. I came out with no leg on one side, the other leg all twisted around like a pretzel, is what my mom said. and all the fingers fused on the left hand, and they had no idea that this was coming or what to expect for my future or what this meant, and no stand, nobody to compare notes with. And the closest that I've, you know, the closest explanation that they've given me is that I probably had amniotic band syndrome. So that is a rare congenital condition where the amniotic sac sort of partially ruptures, where there's these fibers that then wrap around the limbs of the developing fetus, and that blocks the blood flow to the developing limbs. And so, what they see with amniotic band syndrome is either shortened limbs, clubbed foot, or missing limbs or missing digits. And I have all of those things. So that's the most likely explanation of the cause, um, other than maybe some environmental factor. Nowadays when you're pregnant, they give you a long list of all these things you're not supposed to eat and um, you know do. And my mom, generally was very healthy and avoided alcohol and drugs during pregnancy, but it's hard to know if there's something in her environment that could have affected my fetal development. But luckily, nothing neurological, and all my internal organs function correctly. So it's just the limb development, and amazingly, the right arm. It's another thing that makes me think amniotic band is that the right arm did not get, for whatever reason, just random chance, the right arm did not get twisted up in the bands where all of my other limbs did, because my right arm is completely normal anatomy. So, but before I had kids, I did have them do a full genetic analysis. Again, I'm a biologist. I thought that would just be really cool in general. And I said, just to rule out possibilities, because I have a family friend who has a genetic mutation that caused her disability. She's a double leg amputee. In her condition, there is a 50% chance that she would pass on the limb deficiency gene to her kids. So, that I think is important to know those things. It's so I'm somebody that likes to be prepared, and I want to know, I wanted to know, is my condition hereditary? Pretty much they told us my whole life it probably wasn't hereditary. It was just a random event. Amniotic band syndrome is not a hereditary thing. It's a random event, a very rare event that happens in fetal development. But before I had kids, I said, give me a full genetic panel. I knew the human genome had been sequenced. I followed that story closely. That's was a big deal when I was in undergrad. That was unraveling, the sequencing of the human genome and what genes code for what, in humans. And um, so I said, give me the full panel. I want to see what my DNA says about my biology. And the amazing thing is, the panel showed me that I have all of the genes that code for normal limb development. So, of the known genes that code for normal limb development, I have them all intact, complete, without mutations. So, in other words, my DNA says I should have um, 2 legs and I should have 10 fingers, uh, and even though I don't. So, but what that means is it's not hereditary. It's not, I can't pass on this condition to my kids. And of course, they won't ever give you 100%, you're 100% in the clear. So they said, well,
Yeah.
99% chance you won't pass this on to your kids. And I have to say, I am really grateful that um, that these two healthy, people with complete limbs did come out of me, and that they have all the opportunities, that for me, it was, I don't know if I would have necessarily had biological children. Not because I don't think my life is valuable, because I do, obviously, but I think it's along the lines of you want better for your kids than you had. And, growing up with limb deficiencies is certainly, there've certainly been obstacles to that. And I, want the best for the kids. And so I'm grateful that my condition was not hereditary.
Yeah, I can completely understand and see your logic there. 100% be the same way. I love how we've just covered like the evolution of like medical science and like just biology in general, whether it's covering anatomy and stuff, and just to see how it's played out. And you've really lived it and seen it, and then you're part of the research, which is another fascinating thing. And so, given like all your 42 years of experience, all the hats you wear as both, a mom, an adventure person that mountain bikes, things like that, and doing athletics, and then being a professor and getting your doctorate, I'm kind of curious of like maybe how you want to be remembered.
Yeah, that's interesting way to think about it, because I'm hoping that science will make it possible for us to live forever.
That's fair.
um, they're having some success with mice in that area right now,
Hmm.
but I don't know. I mean, I certainly, I certainly really try to be a hero for my family, um, uh, for my children, for them to see. I mean, they're aware that mom is has a disability, but they love it that mom keeps up with them. And all these we one of the things we recently filmed on Instagram was the race between myself and my kids hopping, because they said, "Mom, you're kind of slow when it comes to walking." Talking about with my prosthetic leg on. I'll admit I'm pretty slow with the prosthetic on. And I said, "But what about hopping? Do you think you could beat me in a hopping race?" "Oh yeah, mom. Yeah, yeah. We could beat you." And I said, "Okay, let's do it." We filmed it. It wasn't staged or anything. And so we only did it once because my little guy actually pulled a muscle in his leg. So we just did one take of
Oh,
it, and we just hopped. You have to go on Instagram and find it. And we hopped across a field, and they were fast, but they kept switching legs. The thing was, you had to hop on your left leg since mom only has a left leg. So you have to hop on your left leg, and they kept switching legs in the video. You see, they kept going on and off. And then my little guy, I guess, pulls a muscle, but I won the race. And that's the point, right? That don't underestimate mom, what mom is capable of doing. So, I like them to see that, and I think it will help them with whatever obstacles they face in their life. Like I said, I'm grateful that they don't have the same physical challenges that I've had to overcome. But the truth is, everybody has challenges. I mean, mine are on the surface and everybody could see it, but everybody will face challenges in their life, be it personal challenges or, um, financial challenges or relationship challenges. There will always be challenges. But what matters is your mindset. That matters most, is what I have found from my experience. It's the mindset that matters. If you see yourself as less than, if you see yourself as disabled, you are. And honestly, I don't like that word, disabled or handicapped. Both of those words I don't like, because to me that has a connotation of not being able to do something, where I can do whatever I want to do. I've always been able to find a way to do whatever it is. It's just it's it's more about how can I do it? How do I adapt to do it? Um, how am I going to become a hiker? Well, I need carbon fiber crutches that are lightweight. I need them to be different lengths because my arms are different lengths. I need to bungee my hand down because my left hand doesn't grip. But once all those problems are solved, I can hike 20 plus miles. So I think when my kids see me, when my students see me, when people on Instagram see me, my hope is that they will look at their own life and they will say, well, if she can do it, I can do it. If she can overcome these obstacles, I can overcome these obstacles. That really, it's more about how you see yourself. And if you can see yourself and realize that anything is possible, um, with the right adaptations, um, then I think it just opens up a whole world that maybe you didn't even realize existed. And so I want my kids to face their future obstacles with resilience, with determination, um, and with creativity. And I think they've seen me do that. And we certainly had a lot of family bonding, living in 90 square feet in a van for a year, doing adventures every day, mountain biking, swimming, paddleboarding, rafting, rivers, whitewater rafting rivers that we would just pull up on the side of the road and say, we're going to raft that river. Get the paddleboards out. Okay, here we go. And I would oftentimes be the tester. So before we take the kids down the rapids, these are not tours. Most people take whitewater raft tours, where you wear the life. I mean, I did wear some life. The kids always wear life jackets, but we've done the tours, where you're on a nice, safe raft and you have guides and, everything is really controlled in the environment. And this was not that. I mean, we pull up in the middle of nowhere, Arctic Circle. We see this river and we say, let's go raft this. Okay, mom's going to go first. So get the paddleboard out. I'd put on my full body wetsuit because I'm most likely going to be falling into the river, and it's cold. Um, but the kids would see mom, take off on one leg, and kayak down this river and um, figure out if this is going to work for the family to do. And most of the time we would take the kids as the second round, and and they I think having a disabled parent, but seeing what I'm able to overcome and what's possible. I think that mindset is contagious. I think my kids have that. They're little, but they have a maturity about them that is interesting. That um, because they know, for example, on this 20-mile hike we did, they carried the packs because they knew for mom that was a really long hike for mom. And so they, being little kids, they didn't mind carrying the packs. My husband carried the heavy packs. The kids each carried a pack. I did not carry a pack, just to be honest. But that was a long way for me, and especially through the part. There was miles and miles of the hike in Alaska where it was through the bog, which is this marshy area where my crutch tips kept sticking. So it was like not an easy hike. I kept like poke holing through these. We got out the snow attachments on my crutches. I have these uh, these snowshoe attachments that I use in snow. We put them on for the bog, for the marsh, so that I could get through this mud. And I mean, we waded through knee deep swamp in some portions of this hut. Mosquitoes were out of this world. We all were in full like mosquito net headdress, and the kids didn't complain once. I mean, they were just tough, and they saw that I was being tough, and they mirrored that toughness. And so um, I think that really shapes their life. And I think that, I mean, really what we do, we really hope I really hope that I reach people who are not in my family, people who watch me on Instagram or my students, they seem to remember me for many years to come. Um, but certainly my children, I really want to be remembered by my children for all the adventures that mom did with us, and hopefully we'll make it to Nepal next and we'll do the Annapurna circuit. I'm also training for a triathlon again, so they'll see me do that. And hopefully that'll, all of those experiences will just instill in them that inner strength that we all need to cultivate in order to, pursue our dreams.
Well, Wendy, I really appreciate like everything you've come on and said and shared your story. I know you've not only opened my eyes and taught me a lot, but now I can go back and reflect on some of the lessons that you taught us. And I'm really just grateful that we got to meet and talk and hear your story. It's phenomenal, all the things you've got to do. And thanks for sharing it with us. And sounds like, since you made your Instagram public, that people can start to follow your story on there. And can't wait to see what else you do.
Yes, so my Instagram is amputee.adventurer. So feel free to follow me. It is public for that reason, to allow anybody who's interested in just seeing, what we do as a family, and, silly things we do too, like hopping races.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for sharing your time with us. I really appreciate it. And it was a pleasure meeting
It
you.
was a pleasure meeting you. Thank you so much for inviting me on your show.